Hare Krishna. So welcome all to Shri Mangalarati and the short Bhagavatam class. So today's verse that we are going to discuss is from first canto, chapter 10, verse number 23. I will try and share my screen. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 10, Text 23. Sava avyam yat padam atra suryo jitendriya nirjita matreshvaraha pashyanti bhaktya utkalatmana nava esham sattva parimarstham arthahi. Word to word meaning, translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Word to word meaning, Saha, he, by providence, Avyam, this, yet that which, Pada Artha, here is the same personality of Godhead, Shri Krishna, Suryaha, great devotees, Jita Indriyaha, one who can overcome the influence of senses, Nirjita, thoroughly controlled, Matreshvanaha, life, Pashyanti, can see Bhakti by dint of devotional service, Utkalita, developed, Amala Atmana, those whose mind are thoroughly cleansed. Now Isha, certainly by this only, Sattvam, existence, Parimarstum, for purifying the mind completely, Arhati, deserve. So translation goes as, here the same supreme personality of Godhead, whose transcendental form is experienced by great devotees who are completely cleansed of material consciousness by dint of rigid devotional service and full control of life and the senses, and that is the only way to purify existence. Purport. As it is stated in Bhagavad Gita, the Lord can be known in his real nature by dint of devotional service only. So, it is stated here that only the great devotees of the Lord who are able to clear the mind of all material dust by rigid devotional service can experience the Lord as he is. Jitendriya means one who has full control over the senses. The senses are active part of the body and their activities cannot be stopped. The artificial means of yogic process to make the senses inactive has proved to be abject failure. Even in the case of great yogis like Vishwamitra Muni controlled the senses by yogic trance. But when he happened to meet Menaka, a heavenly society woman, he became a victim of sex, and the artificial way of controlling the senses failed. But in the case of pure devotee, the senses are controlled at all are not at all artificially stopped from doing anything, but they are given different good engagements. When the senses are engaged in more attractive activities, there is no chance of them there being attracted by an inferior engagement. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that the senses can be controlled only by better engagements. Devotional service necessitates purifying the senses or engaging them in the activities of devotional service. Devotional service is not inaction. Anything done in the service of the Lord becomes at once purified of its material nature. The material conception is due to the ignorance only. There is nothing beyond Vasudeva. The Vasudeva concept gradually develops in the heart of the learned after a prolonged acceleration of the receptive organs. But the process ends in knowledge of accepting Vasudeva as all in all. In case of devotional service, this is there is very simple method. The very same method is accepted from the very beginning, and the grace of the Lord is all factual knowledge becomes revealed in the heart of devotee due to dictation of the Lord from within. Therefore, controlling senses by devotional service is the only and the easiest means. I'll offer my prayers. ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपकदा मह्यं दधान्ति स्वपदान्तिकं। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरुश्रीयुतपदकमलं श्रीगुरुं वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सहगण रघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधा कृष्णपादान् सहगण ललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च। हे कृष्ण करुणा सिन्धु दीनबन्धु जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिका कान्ता राधा कान्ता नमोस्तुते। तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यस्य कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधारा श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंदा। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे रामा 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 हरे हरे। कृष्ण पदाय कृष्ण पृष्ठाय भूतलक्ष्मी जय पताका स्वामी आचार्य पदाय कृपा प्रदाय गौर पदाय नमः। कृष्ण पदाय कृष्ण पृष्ठाय भूतलक्ष्मी भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी नमस्ते सारस्वती देवी परमानंद जय शून्यमति पश्चात देशोत्तरम्। So Hare Krishna. I'll read out the translation again. Here, the same Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose transcendental form is experienced by the great devotees who are completely cleansed of material consciousness by dint of rigid devotional service and full control of life and senses, and that is the only way to purify existence. So, we've been seeing as to how the Lord is all ready to depart from Hastinapur, and we have been hearing as to how the women of Hastinapur they're glorifying the Lord, and they by speaking about the various pastimes that he had performed during the time period when he was in Hastinapur. And this particular verse in the purport also we can see verse number 23, and in the purport it's a very beautiful purport that's been given by Srila Prabhupada, and how Srila Prabhupada is emphasizing time and again on rendering devotional service. And we can see the same in case of the women of Hastinapur. They are all engaging their senses in serving the Supreme Lord. When the Supreme Lord is departing from Hastinapur, the women are engaging all their senses in the, glorifying the Supreme Lord. So here Srila Prabhupada is emphasizing on devotional service, and he tells that it is the only way, performing devotional service is the only way through which one can control their senses. So, when we look at the sense control in itself is a very big topic, and we all know how senses have to senses are always, the senses have to be always satisfied. So we are wide that, and that is the main reason why we fall prey to sense gratification, right? So satisfying senses is an impossible task. If you see within, it is so difficult to satisfy senses, because once once a desire has emerged, and by when we satisfy that desire, another desire already comes in. So controlling senses and even satisfying, even if we satisfy the senses for maybe that particular time period or that particular instance, it may be satisfied, but again the desires over and again come over. And if we keep on satisfying our senses, we know the consequence of it is that you have to come back to this material world, which is dukkhalayam ashashvatam. So how can we, come out of this sense gratification? Srila Prabhupada writes in the last line of the purport, telling that devotional service is the only easiest and the simple means to come out of the sense gratification. So, when we talk about controlling our senses, it is so difficult, and we can go back to the scriptures and we can see as to how various exalted people have tried to control their senses by using various yogic methods. So it is impossible. Even in Bhagavad Gita, the Supreme Lord tells that when Arjuna, when the Supreme Lord instructs Arjuna about when the Supreme Lord instructs Arjuna Bhagavad Gita in the battlefield of Kurukshetra, Arjuna himself, he was such a great warrior. He tells Krishna that, Krishna, I can control this wind, but I cannot control my mind. So that is how difficult it is to control your mind and your senses, because such a great warrior like Arjuna, um, who could even conquer sleep, he's telling that controlling mind is so difficult. He can control the wind but not the mind. So we can understand, if such exalted devotees of the Supreme Lord are finding it difficult to control their senses, then what to speak of ourselves who have just begun our journey towards re-establishing our lost connection with the Supreme Lord. So here in the purport, Srila Prabhupada gives quotes the instance of Vishwamitra Muni. And he tells that how Vishwamitra Muni, he was controlling his senses by the means of Vedic yogic process. So it was not that he had controlled his senses for say 2 months, 6 months, or say for a year. No, Vishwamitra Muni, he was controlling his senses through the yogic process for past so many years. But what happened when he saw Menaka? It is said that he didn't even see Menaka. When he was controlling his senses, he just heard the tinkling of the ankle bells of Menaka. So that when just by hearing the tinkling of ankle bells of Menaka, he fell prey for his senses. So one thing that we can understand this is from this instance is that when we have to engage all our senses in the devotional service of the Supreme Lord. Just because the entire how did Vishwamitra fall from his uh, position is because his ears were active. right? He's when he was you do controlling his senses through the yogic process, his ears were active, and just because his ears were active, only by that tinkling of the ankle bells, he fell down from his position. And then we know what happened. He united with Menaka in the wrong time, and one thing led to another, right? So that is what Prabhupada is trying to trying and mentioning in the purport also, that how this all these mechanical processes of yoga cannot help one to control their senses. And the crude example for it was Vishwamitra Muni. He was controlling his senses from such a long time, and in spite of that, what happened? He fell prey for it. So through yogic process, nobody can control their senses. So how do we control our senses? Is when we give it a higher taste. So when we are giving our senses a higher taste, automatically we lose taste for these lower things of sense gratification. So I think we all would have seen. I would like to state this example. We all would have, heard to so many instances from the scriptures itself, as to at different time and different time, place, and circumstance, how different personalities fell prey for their senses. So I will try and just state as to who were the personalities who fell prey, and what means did they use to come out of their sense gratification. So, as stated by Srila Prabhupada, it is first example would be Vishwamitra Muni. And going down into the pages of Srimad Bhagavatam not only states as to how they fell down from their exalted positions, but the beauty of Srimad Bhagavatam is it also helps us to know how we can, even though a devotee can fall from their exalted positions, but Srimad Bhagavatam also helps us to revive back to that position. So we'll see both the aspects as to how they've fallen down and how they've come back to their, through what means have they revived back to their spiritual position. So moving on to Bharat Maharaj. We all know how Bharat Maharaj, he got attached to a baby deer. And when he was looking after this baby deer, and he got so attached, in spite of, he was a king, he was a Maharaj, and he had given up all the opulences and all the luxuries and comforts in his life, and he had left his palace and he had come to forest in order to meditate and go back home, back to Godhead. But in that meanwhile, his senses fell prey to a baby deer, and in the entire process he got attached to the baby deer. And in the same consciousness, we know how he left his body, and then he had to become a deer, and later on he had to become Jada Bharata. So after that he went back home, back to Godhead. So one in from this just by a small attraction that Bharat Maharaj had towards that baby deer, it led him to take three more births to go back, get connected, go back home, back to the Supreme Lord. And our senses are so, when we fall prey for the sense gratification, even before you can realize that you've fallen as a prey to your senses, it would be very late by the time we could even realize that we have fallen prey to our senses, and we are trying to satisfy it, and these senses are not getting satisfied because they're looking for higher taste, as I mentioned. So we can see the same thing as to how sense gratification can take a person to any extent. If we keep on satisfying our senses, the urges of the senses, they can go to any extent, and we all. And the mind plays with us in such a way that we can go to any extent to satisfy our senses. That is how powerful these senses are, and it is in our hand to control our senses. So we can see as to what extent sense gratification we can take us to in the example of Bilva Mangal Thakur. We all know the story, right, as to how he was associating with a prostitute, and just to satisfy his senses, he used to, take up a great struggle and go to meet the Chintamani, who was a prostitute, and associate with her and satisfy his senses. So we all know that on the day of the Shraddha ceremony of his father, he had to perform the rituals as a son. It was his duty to perform the rituals for his father, and he is even when he was performing, it was mentioned in the past time that even when he was performing the Shraddha rituals to his father, he was thinking about Chintamani. So he was physically present there, but mentally he was thinking about going and associating with Chintamani. So he was asking the person who was performing Shraddha ceremony as to how long would it take. And as soon as he finished performing the Shraddha ceremony for his father, there was it is said that it was heavy downpour. It was raining heavily, and in spite of that heavy rain, Bilva, he made sure that he reached the place of Chintamani. And how did he reach? It is said that he had to cross over a river to reach to the place of Chintamani, and his urge to satisfy his senses were at such a peak that it was heavy rain, so there was no boatman who could take Bilwa to the other side of the river. And he saw when he saw there was he saw that there was a log of wood, and he apparently it was a dead body, but he was trying to satisfy his senses to such an extent that he had become blind. And in satisfying these senses, he had become blind, and he presumed that dead body to be a log of wood. And he, takes over that dead body and crosses over the river. And then he sees, when he comes and stands in front of the house of Chintamani, the doors are locked. And he has to cross over the compound to reach Chintamani. And this time he presumes a snake to be a rope. And he takes help of the snake, presuming it to be a rope. He jumps over and jumps over the gate, and he reaches Chintamani. And when he reaches Chintamani, Chintamani tells that I thought this situation and the circumstances were so evident that I thought that you wouldn't be coming over. And if you would have just directed your senses, the attachment that you have towards me, if you could have directed them towards serving the Supreme Lord, you could have achieved much more in your spiritual life. And that's when Bilwa realized that, how he had become blind in satisfying his senses. And we all know as to how later he renders devotional service to the Supreme Lord. So the entire thing that we can learn from the pastime of Bilva Mangala Thakur is that if you fall prey to your senses, and in satisfying these senses, you become blind. That is what happened in case of Bilva, right? He assumed the dead body to be a log of wood and snake to be a rope. And this is how we become blind if we keep on satisfying if we fall prey to our senses. And senses are we are so weak in controlling our senses. Even small things can agitate our senses. We can see in case of Sober Muni as to how he was such an exalted brahmana, and he thought that if he is on land, he could come in contact with any of the sense gratifying objects, and he could fall prey to it. So in order to avoid that, what did he do? He went underwater. Right? He went underwater and he started meditating. And when he went underwater and started meditating, he just saw two fishes mating, and he fell prey to it. So, and then we know how he later married so many daughters of so many daughters of the king, and he had so many children. So even small things, the smallest things can agitate our mind. So sometimes we think, let me, satisfy this particular desire of the sense, then I will, my senses will not be agitated. But we are failing to understand that the senses are just trying to make us fall into their trap. We may think, okay, this particular desire we will satisfy, and then later, it would settle down, the senses would calm down. But no, the minute you start satisfying the senses, that is when they start demanding more and more. That is when the desires get agitated, and that's when we feel, it must, we have to keep on satisfying our senses, because the desires become endless. So I came across this past particular pastime or an instance as to how, we think that we will just satisfy this one desire of the senses, and then later maybe I will not be agitated. So once, a monkey, it thought, it will fast on Ekadashi. So it was all determined to fast on Ekadashi. And yeah, so then later a visitor came by, and he was trying to distribute the bananas to all the monkeys. And this particular monkey, who was fasting, he thought he will not take up the banana that they're distributing, because he's fasting and it's an Ekadashi. And then later, after some time, he thinks, okay, let me take the banana and keep. What is wrong in it? I will just take the banana and keep it with me. So he took the banana, he was keeping it with him. And after some more time, he thought, okay, I will just peel the banana. I am fasting, I will not eat, I will just peel the banana. So it peels the banana and it keeps. And after some time, it thinks, I am fasting, I shouldn't be eating, so I will just keep the banana in my mouth. I will not swallow it. Only if I swallow it, that's when I'm breaking the fast. So it takes a bite and keeps it in his mouth. And then later he swallows the banana, and thinking that he will just eat another bite, he ends up eating the entire banana. So the entire thing that is depicted in this example is that the monkey just started with taking the banana. But at the end, what happened? He gave up that austerity of that he took it on Ekadashi. So similarly, our senses, we just think, okay, just this, I just hear this one Bollywood song maybe, and then without our knowledge, we end up hearing another. So by the time we, stop, our senses would already be absorbed in that Bollywood song. So what to talk of remembering Krishna, what to talk of observing our senses in remembering the Supreme Lord. So we saw as to how strong the senses are. But even stronger than the senses is the Supreme Lord. So how do we, because senses are in a way Maya, we are falling prey to Maya. But when we connect to our Krishna, who is stronger than Maya, or is master of Maya, we can transcend these sense gratification. But how do we connect to Krishna, right? How do we, because we know Krishna is the controller of Maya, and only when we connect to Krishna, we can get over the clutches of Maya. How do we do it? Srila Prabhupada, that is what he's mentioning in the purport. He's telling that the only means to do it is when we perform devotional service. And what we all know the Navavidha Bhakti, right? And the first step in performing a devotional service unto the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord is when we start hearing about the Supreme Lord. So it is time and again, even in the scriptures, it is mentioned that there are so many devotees who have just heard about the Supreme Lord and become their devotees. For that case, it could be Bhakta Shiromani Prahlad Maharaj, Rukmini Devi, and even There are so many devotees who have just heard about the Supreme Lord, and they've become devotees. So all we have to try and render devotional service to the Supreme Lord. So when we all know, right, how our senses are desiring for higher taste. And what is that higher taste? That higher taste, the senses can be the senses will get detached from the lower taste and get absorbed in the higher taste only when we give it a higher taste. And all these material things are of lower taste, they are of lower nature, and we have to try and observe our senses in rendering devotional service. That is the higher taste that we can give to our senses. So we have to try and always engage ourselves in the devotional service. And when how do we please the Supreme Lord? The only way to please the Supreme Lord is when we perform devotional service. And when we are performing devotional service, it should be unconditional and unalloyed devotional service. It shouldn't be that, I'm performing devotional service, so it becomes the duty of the Supreme Lord to come and rescue me when I'm in trouble. No, that is not what we are looking for. We are looking for is we have to perform devotional service, and later it is the mercy, it is the will of the Supreme Lord. If he wants to come and rescue us, he can come and rescue us. Otherwise, that also can be taken as the mercy of the Supreme Lord. Supreme Lord not coming in that particular situation is also the mercy of the Supreme Lord. He's maybe we are not completely surrendered at that point of time. And that is how do we completely surrender is when we perform devotional service. And performing devotional service is such an integral part, because we may think that I will just chant, I will just read the scriptures, and my senses will be controlled. Yes, they will be controlled. But even when we are performing the chanting and reading, how attentive are we when we are doing that? Right? So it is not that we are chanting our 16 rounds but attentively. No, I mean, at least talking about myself, I don't do my chanting of my 16 rounds completely attentively. So at least if I'm not chanting right inattentively, I can try and engage my senses. Only engage, I cannot think that for the morning mangalarati time I will engage my senses, and the later part of the day I can do sense gratification just because I've engaged my senses in the morning. No, devotional service means you're in the service of Krishna 24/7. You can remember Krishna when you're doing devotional service to the Supreme Lord. You're remembering the Supreme Lord. Devotional service helps you to remember the Supreme Lord. So we always try to put conditions. So one thing we can make a note of is that performing unalloyed devotional service to the Supreme Lord. And the second thing that we have to note when we perform devotional service is to never distinguish services. There is nothing. Krishna never looks at, you're performing a higher devotional service, you're performing a lower devotional service. There is no distinction. I was hearing that a person who is performing the service of looking after the devotee's chapel near the chapel stand, near the slipper stand, he's going to get the same amount of benefit or the same mercy of the Supreme Lord as compared to the person who is performing the devotionals, who is rendering arti, or who is performing mangal arati standing in front of the Supreme Lord. They're going to get the same benefit. So there is no higher devotional or lower devotional service. It is only loving devotional service to the Supreme Lord. So you don't have to think that the person who is performing arati to the Lord is getting a higher service. No, Krishna is bhavagrahi. He's seeing the bhava, the mood in which you're performing, you're rendering the devotional service. So we have to try and try and mold our mood in which we are rendering the devotional service. That is what that is how we can see even in the previous verses, that that Krishna who couldn't be bound by who couldn't be understood by such exalted people, and they were reciting such beautiful verses using their high end Sanskrit or their high end knowledge, and glorifying the Supreme Lord and singing Vedic recitation of the Brahmins. It is compared to the women of Hastinapur, who are very simple. So, how does Krishna get attracted by the talks of women of Hastinapur? Is because they are very simple. They are not highly as knowledgeable as those Brahmanas, right? But the mood in which they are glorifying the Supreme Lord, it is so exalted. Their mood is, they are in such a high mood, they're in such bhava stage, that this their simple mode of glorifying the Supreme Lord, their simple words, they're not using some high-end vocabulary words to glorify. Their simple words are so smoothing to the ears of the Supreme Lord. So that what we can understand is that the mood that we have to perform devotional service becomes important, and not what type of devotional service you are performing. And it is only the loving service that you render. You can never see no acharya in our entire parampara, you can see, who distinguishes their service. I was hearing to J Triple S, which was conducted in our temple, and where Sundar Nitai Prabhu, he was telling our Guru Maharaj, His Holiness Jayapataka Swami, he never distinguished any of the services, any of the devotional service that Srila Prabhupada gave him. He performed even the menial, the most menial service of even cleaning bathroom, all the menial services. He never distinguished. So we can, take the example of our Guru Maharaj, and try not distinguishing, because we are all performing devotional service. The point is that not that we are not performing, but when we are performing, we are distinguishing, and that is when the entire mood changes and the desired result doesn't come. That is when, in spite of performing devotional service, we fall prey to our senses. Why is that? It is not that devotional service, devotional service does not have the capacity to transcend, but it is because of our anarthas, that because we are distinguishing devotional service, because we are laying down conditions while performing devotional service, we are unable to transcend these modes of material nature and completely surrender. So we should never, when we are performing devotional service, we should never doubt, I'm rendering devotional service, will Krishna protect me? No, Krishna has protected everybody who has performed devotional service. When Krishna has protected Draupadi, when Krishna has protected Gajendra, when Krishna has, when this entire battle of Kurukshetra happened, and one mesmerizing thing in the women of Hastinapur that we can see is that they lost their husband. Husband can be the most loved ones for their wives, and they lost their husband. And in spite of that, when we know that Krishna was involved in the battle of Kurukshetra, and when we know that this other person is responsible for losing our loved ones, we would only envy them. But women of Hastinapur, they they did not envy Krishna, but their faith on Krishna even more increased, and we can see how they were glorifying Krishna. So, and one of the last examples I would state is Ambrish Maharaj. We know how Ambrish Maharaj, he engaged all of his senses in performing devotional service, and his entire body was at the service of the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. And this is, has he engaged all his senses in serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When Durvasa Muni came and when he cursed, his senses were so controlled, he didn't even get agitated by it. He had the ability to curse back Durvasa Muni, but he did not. Why is that? Because his senses were controlled by the devotional service he performed. Even in case of Haridas Thakur, when that prostitute came, his holy he was engaging his senses by chanting the holy name of the Lord. Because he had given his senses a higher taste, that lower taste of engaging, associating with the prostitute, was not he was not agitated by it. But in case of Vishwamitra Muni, we can see that because he used some yogic methods, some mechanical principles to control his senses, he fell prey to Menaka. So how do we know that senses are weak, senses fall prey? How do we transcend them? Only through devotional service. So these were some of the examples that I could points that I could gather for this particular words. So I'm sorry for exceeding the time, and I thank all of you for your patient hearing. Granthra Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Patita Pavana Guru Maharaj ki jai.
Yeah. Hare Krishna. So we keep it open for any questions. Hare Krishna. And the devotees kindly come on the video. You can unmute yourself and ask a question. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. Dandavat Pranam.
Hare
Mataji,
Krishna.
it was a very nice class, Mataji. Many points I could take. One is that the yogic process and other processes versus devotional service. That contrast you brought in very nicely, Mataji, about how the yogic processes, they do not have any guarantee. They might fall even if they practice for many years. Whereas devotional service, in that one has no fall down. Although we fall down only because of our own anarthas that we have while performing devotional service. And thank you so much, Mataji. I understood that the yogic processes, they are like orphan childs, and devotional service is like child of a king. And, the king may send the child out, but always he'll be having an eye on that child. He's protected always, like that. Fall down also has some message for us. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Okay. Thank you, Mataji. So we got so many points from you, especially your own realization also. Though we are chanting the 16 rounds, but all the 16 rounds are not attentive. So that's why we are supposed to chant extra rounds so that we can compensate the inattentive beats and rounds. So another key point here is controlling the senses, and there is no other way except the devotional service. Prabhupada says it is the easiest means. So it is not just like, our senses can maybe controlled the moment we start chanting the holy name of the Lord. But it takes gradual process. Controlling purification takes a lot of time. So in the words it is said, Sattvam Parimashrutam Arhati. Arhati means deserve. Only, by devotional service it can be, conquered. And here in the translation it is mentioned, rigid devotional service. So the word rigid devotional service is by Srila Prabhupada, just to mention that, and whatever it may be in our life, so many obstacles may keep coming, but rigidly we should chant the holy name of the Lord and do the service. This way we can easily able to, surpass the dictation of the senses. Okay, so
Hare Krishna,
Hare
Prabhu.
Krishna.
One doubt I had, Mataji, like even in Bhagavatam we see that gopis were also very simple cowherd girls, and they also did very nice devotional service. But in another case we see that they were very exalted sages in their last birth, and they also knew Vedic knowledge very well. So how can we understand this, Mataji? While contrasting between the Vedic hymns of Brahmanas and the Dwarkavasis, the women. Can you please help understand this?
Mataji, what I had heard in one of the lectures is that we know through knowledge, just by having knowledge about Krishna, we cannot understand Krishna. So But when we render devotional service of the Supreme Lord, that is when, you know, the Supreme Lord reveals himself. Because we can see that how many of us can hear about the same pastime, the same putana killing, the same govardhan lifting, or you know, Krishna stealing the butter, Yashoda Maya binding. How many of us can hear the same pastime again and again? So, in case we are able to sit and hear the same pastime again and again, that means we are getting taste. You know, we are getting that taste and mood of enjoying the pastime of the Supreme Lord. It is not possible, right? See, for example, there are so many instances from Srimad Bhagavatam in the class that state over and time and again. But if we start thinking, oh, this I know, I want to learn something new, then it becomes a means of you're doing it only because you want to acquire knowledge. You can acquire knowledge, but Krishna will not be revealed to you, because the knowledge itself is coming from Krishna. And the entire Vedas also tells the same thing. No? The end result of Vedas, reading Vedas, is to understand the Krishna is supreme personality of Godhead. And how do we understand Krishna is the only means is rendering devotional service. So this accumulation of knowledge is on a material platform, but if you have to transcend to the spiritual mode is when you perform devotional service. So that was the difference I was stating. These brahmanas, they were glorifying the Lord using the knowledge, the Vedic knowledge they had. That is also because that's been mentioned in the Shastras. I'm not going against it. You have to use Uttama Shloka. So they were using the topmost words to glorify the Supreme Lord. But the bhava of the gopis or the women of Hastinapur were even more higher, because they were, you know, glorifying the Supreme Lord. The simple talking of the women of Hastinapur was so smoothing to the ears of the Lord, and it is considered greater than the Vedic hymns because of the mood that they were, you know, glorifying the Supreme Lord. So if it is answering your question, Mataji, Prabhu, if I am right on this point.
Yes, you are right. You got only one point about knowledge, but there are so many other aspects. Just I would like to highlight here. Not only gnana. With gnana we cannot understand Krishna, and with yogic process also we cannot understand Krishna. Gnana. Um, Even with vairagya also we cannot understand Krishna. If all these austerities are completely engaged in the devotional service of the Lord, then one can able to realize, like knowledge acquired, knowledge realized, but knowledge revealed. Revealed, you know, it is coming from Krishna after seeing our homework. And another point Vijayata Mataji asked is the queens and the gopis. So the key element in the between them is gopis in a highest transcendental bhava, and they enjoy even viraha bhava, parakiya rasa. So when the beloved and the loved are separated, then actual love will begin. We keep seeing so many cinemas, you know. The lovers, you know, they got separated from parents or from guardians, and they exchange a lot of messages or through messengers. So, though they are away, but they are in one, in the sense by thinking of them, just like Rukmini. So the gopis always think of Krishna, even in the separation. But whereas queens, they are always attached to Krishna. They want to be with Krishna. So either you are with Krishna or without Krishna, gopis are always in transcendental ecstasy. That's why we also should acquire that mode, what Acharya says, that Gopi Bharta Padakamalayo Das Dasan Das. We should be the servants of the servants of the servants of the servants of the gopis, like that. Hope it clears your doubt, Vijayata Mataji.
Yes, Prabhuji. Thank you so much, Mataji, and Prabhuji also. I understood that the mood matters, not only the knowledge that we use in Krishna service, but the mood also, state of mind which we use, and also about difference between gopis and queens. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Okay, the time is up. The speaker has to, control themselves to limit their time.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, one simple question.
Yes,
So,
Raji, it's for you.
just a minute, only one. Devotional service, does it mean puja archana? Is it that?
Sugopika Mataji, question for you.
Prabhu, can you come again?
Means
Can you-
devotional service, does it mean puja archana? Doing that is devotional service?
Yes, Prabhu, that is all. That also in Navaveda Bhakti you can see Archanam also comes in the Navaveda Bhakti, but that is also a part of your devotional service. If that is your question, that is also a part of your devotional service. It adds on to your devotional service, right, Prabhu? If I'm
Yes,
right.
yes, you are right. So, Vasudeva Pal Prabhu, Navavida Bhakti is the devotional service.
Okay, Hare Krishna. Understood. Hare Krishna. Varnavada Pradam.
Okay, today is wedding anniversary of Bhupalak Prabhu and Sudamai Mataji. So wishing them a blissful Krishna conscious wedding anniversary. They have been serving for the last so many years, and we wish them, a blissful Krishna conscious wedding anniversary. Then that's all. No other messages. Okay, other messages have been noted. Fine then.